Good morning. I'm Renee Keel with SRF Consulting Group, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about ADA transition plan requirements. This was a tool that was developed and funded by the Local Road Research Board to assist agencies in making their public rights-of-way ADA compliant. Before we start today's webinar, I just want to show you where you can access the document we're going to be going through. You can see there's this link here at the lrb.org. And if I click on that, that's going to take me directly to the location. It's right here under the web software applications. But you can also go to the search window here and type in ADA transition plan, and it'll take you to the same location. So if we click here on this link and scroll down to the bottom, you can click on this link and it will give you an option to save the file. And then from there you'd want to save it and extract the files from the zip file. So you don't need to go through this process for today's webinar. I was just wanting to let you know where you can access this at the end of today's webinar, just so you understand if you'd like to have a copy of this as well. During today's webinar, if you have any questions, you'll see in the top left corner of your screen there's a little bubble that's a question bubble. When you click on that, it'll open up a window that is an email window. Just type your questions into that email, it'll get sent to us, and then we will ask the presenter those questions during the presentation. You won't see your question typed in on the screen, but be confident that we do have it. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce our presenter for today. This is Jim Gerzema. He is a professional engineer and senior associate at SRF Consulting Group. He has 10 years of experience in designing transportation facilities for local agencies. And for the past 4 years, he has been assisting in the development of ADA training for SRF, MnDOT, and the Local Road Research Board. So, Jim.
Thank you, Renee. Renee showed you where to download these materials, and everything I'm going to talk about today is contained within those documents that you can download. So I'm going to cover over everything, but be confident that if you miss something or if we quickly go through something, everything is covered in this document. And so we're going to show the document that's available for download, and it's got a few different components. It's got tabs across the top, and it's got next and back buttons, and every now and then you'll see download links off to the side. This document does download various other documents. They're in Word format, Excel format, or Adobe Acrobat format. As you download them, each document will be saved or need to be saved as new files to prevent overwriting the originals. As Renee said, this document was prepared by our Local Road Research Board because Minnesota agencies are required to, and all agencies are required to, follow the Americans with Disabilities Act, and part of that requirement is that transition plans should be developed to identify where there are barriers in the agency's facilities and how that agency is going to correct those barriers. This document helps guide you through that process and provides a template for what that document should look like. But we should point out that because the ADA requirements is in the actual Code of Federal Regulations, each agency should contact their legal counsel in reviewing this document to make sure that each agency is comfortable with the process they're taking. The overview of the document that we prepared, the document itself has an overview. We're going to cover some Department of Justice guidance, the involvement of the Local Road Research Board, and then into the two big guts of the project that we created. The first section being the process that the agencies should take to develop their transition plan, and then the model transition plan document template that we've created. At the very end, we're going to go over some resources that are very helpful in each agency creating their template or their transition plan. Some quick information, authors about the document we prepared. the Local Road Research Board Technical Advisory Panel. A number of names here. I'm not going to go through them all, but these people were very instrumental in developing this document. So into the overview. Again, as Renee said, the Minnesota Local Road Research Board felt this was an important topic to help local agencies get up to speed in their ADA preparations for public rights-of-way and other facilities. This requirement is set forth in the Code of Federal of Regulations, and as I said before, here's where we get our first link off to the side. I'm going to pull it up, and it brings you to the actual code language, transition plans, and it sets 4 specific things that these plans must do at a minimum. Identify obstacles in the public right-of-way, describe in detail the methods that we use to make the facilities compliant, specify a schedule for making those things compliant, and indicate an official responsible for implementation of the plan. And so those 4 things were set forth in the ADA regulations that were adopted back in 1992. It's a long time ago. Most agencies, when that came out, most agencies did prepare a transition plan, but it was mainly focused on buildings and grounds and other policies and procedures. The public rights-of-way were largely forgotten with the exception of providing curb ramps at intersection corners. Now a greater focus is being driven on making sure all aspects of the public right-of-way are accessible for each agency's pedestrian facilities. And that's why we're proceeding with this, this document. In 2006 and 2007, the Department of Justice prepared a toolkit for best practices for local agencies. That document is available at ada.gov, and we're going to just quick go there. You can see that's got a number of things in PDF format and HTML format talking about all aspects of ADA. It does include curb ramps and pedestrian crossing guidance and checklists. Also things like 911 and emergency communications. So it's a little pretty broad. We're focusing today on public rights-of-way, but this toolkit covers quite a few different things. Next we're going to have the Local Road Research Board supplement. Again, we talked about 2 things. Section 1, a process, and Section 2, the model transition plan template. So going to the process. Oops. A little harder seeing this first screen, so I'm just going to click on it, bring it up to a larger format. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit closer in just a minute, but we're going to step through this process. This process was just one that we feel is a good starting point. Each agency has its own specific ways they like to do public process and developing of documents like this. There are some required elements shown in this process. That's indicated by this shade of blue there. But not all the things that we're going to go through are required elements. Each agency can customize this process to best fit their policies and procedures. All right, I'm going to zoom in here into the very beginning here and begin process. Just getting a starting point, reviewing what the agency has done in the past, gather some information for policymakers to review, and review with your legal counsel how you want to proceed. Different agencies are going to have different levels of risk they might want to take. Large part of this is to mitigate risk or review what risk you might have that you might not realize you have. You're going to look at this footnote number 1 here, and that's to review the information about ADA projects and ADA improvements that have been completed since the ADA came out in 1992. This includes any mill and overlay projects the agency might have. And the reason why we want to review that is because any omission of ADA improvements concurrent with those projects is a risk. Any alterations that were done since 1992 are required to have ADA improvements within the scope of that project. And it has been determined via legal judgment that mill and overlay projects do require curb ramp improvements associated with those. The second one we have here is council board meeting. Not necessarily a required element, but we feel it's important to get public officials sign off on what you're doing. Different agencies might have different thoughts on if they need to do this or not. We have that in here as a suggested starting point. You're going to see footnote number 2. A council board packet should have an overview of Title II requirements so they realize what the requirements are of each individual agency. We have provided some information for that packet associated with this document, and we'll cover that here in just a little bit. Scoping. The public right-of-ways and transition plans require 92. Many agencies already have one for their buildings, as I said before. Included with that, most agencies should already have a Title II ADA coordinator. And so you already have that position. This document needs to coordinate with that so you're not duplicating tasks and responsibilities, as well as your Title II coordinator is technically responsible for the creation of this plan per the ADA guidance. Now, public rights-of-way, your engineering departments, your public works department, they might want to have their own contact person or contact project manager, and each agency may or may not want to create an ADA advisory board, or you already might have one. I mean, that is a possibility that's out there. That footnote 8, that's just outlining that a Title II coordinator is probably already present in your agency or should already be present in your agency. Once we get through the scoping aspect there, we get to a point where we can kind of diverge this process. We have a self-evaluation track there on the bottom of that diversion. That's going out, inventorying your pedestrian facilities within your public right-of-way, finding out what you have, and then doing a self-evaluation after that to figure out how much of that facility is compliant, where your deficiencies are. Looking at that self-evaluation bubble, that's in that darker blue there again. That is also one of the requirements of ADA. Each agency must have a self-evaluation. You're required to know what facilities you have and how they relate in terms of ADA compliance. Concurrent with this, you could start a public process procedure gathering accessibility concerns from the community and give them an overview of the process you're taking, what you're trying to accomplish. Once your self-evaluation is complete, we suggest maybe you go out to the public process again. Footnote 4 there in all this public process is the ADA Title II requires outreach to the disabled community. How you accomplish that is going to be up to each individual agency. We suggested this public process procedure, but knowing each agency has their own ways of doing things, this is just a suggested guidance. In this public process that we've identified, you can summarize your self-evaluation, give the public all the things that the agency has done to achieve ADA compliance in the last 20 years, and review factors for determining priority areas within each community. And the priority areas are very important going forth in your transition plan. After that public process, we're suggesting a council or board work session. Keep your elected officials, your city managers, administrators informed on where this process is. Summarize the public comments that have been received and allow them to provide additional input before the actual plan starts being developed, which is the next blue bubble. Some things you need to determine before you can write your document. Your agency policies. What policies does your agency want to go forward with? Your grievance procedure. Again, footnote 8, one thing that each agency should already have, how will the public rights-of-way fit within that grievance procedure? And then selecting the standards for ADA facilities. What method of standard or documentation are you going to go forward with for your agency? Once you have those things determined, you can prepare your draft transition plan. Footnote 7, that's just telling you that included in this document, we've created a template for you to start with for creation of this document. Once you have the draft, we're suggesting going back through the public process again, sharing the draft, letting the public know how you came to where you came in that process, and also getting it back to the council or board in a work session, presenting the same information to them, allowing them to comment one more time. Once you have that, making your transition plan available for public review and comment. Okay, and I've got a question here. I'm going to take it from the audience.
Looks like someone had a question about the mill and overlay requirement you just mentioned. Is that a U.S. or a MnDOT requirement?
That is that requirement was taken to federal court in Pennsylvania back in the mid-1990s when federal court there did make the ruling that mill and overlay projects do consist of an alteration which required curb ramp improvements or upgrades. That regulation or that ruling specifically covered the installation of new curb ramps, but that is also now being interpreted in some courts as upgrading existing curb ramps. And so that's a installation of new curb ramps. That's a nationwide ruling. Upgrading curb ramps, that's coming out of California. That may soon be a nationwide ruling. But the Department of Justice, the Department of Transportation, FHWA, all consider mill and overlay projects as an alteration requiring curb ramp upgrades. All right, so we're at making your transition plan available for public review. That's one of those required elements that we're noting. It's not quite the same review notifications that many comprehensive plans have. You don't have to advertise it in any registers, state registers, federal registers. Could be just a press release and available on your agency's website, but available for public review. Okay, we have another question.
There's another question that said, do these requirements apply to every agency no matter what size?
The requirements do apply to every agency. Each agency is required to do a self-evaluation. Only larger agencies are required to do a transition plan. And that size requirement is any agency of over 50 employees. So if you look at your agency size, it's 50 total employees regarding maintenance staff, park staff, and administration staff, engineering staff, public works staff. If the total number of employees totals 50, then you're required to do that transition plan. All right, so we're toward the end here of this process. Once you have available for public review, you receive your public comments. You finalize the plan. That's kind of the important part there. Take it to your council or board, have them adopt it. And then another important part here, update the transition plan and self-evaluation on a regular basis. This is not just a one-time deal. It's a constant effort similar to what a comprehensive plan would be for your agency. We have another question.
Yeah, we have another question. With PROAG being draft, to what standards should an agency self-evaluate? It would seem to be a potential waste of time if PROAG changes significantly in the final rule.
That's going to be one of those things that your agency is going to have to make a determination on their own. Here in Minnesota, my recommendation is to evaluate to the same adoption of PROAG that the Minnesota Department of Transportation has adopted, and that's what we've included in this document as an attachment. And then our recommendation was just to flat out say that you're following MnDOT's adoption of public right-of-way guidance. So that way, as MnDOT updates, your document still remains valid. It's just your ruler might change a little bit, but your document still remains valid. And so we've covered updating your transition plan and self-evaluation on a regular basis. Getting back to our main document here. And so like we said, we've got some attachments here off to the side. We're going to step through those real quick. The first one is some fact sheets and frequently asked questions. The first one is from actually the Department of Justice, an ADA and city government's common problems. Covers more than just public rights-of-way, but does have a section on transition plans itself, written to be more general in terms of what the city is required, our cities are required to do, but does have some good guidance in there. So get out of that. And we're going to look at FHWA frequently asked questions. We've included both a PDF of the website as well as a link to the questions. That way, if they do update that link, you can still see it from the document, but we've included a PDF here of what they've said. So this is more specific to public rights-of-way, And again, this also has a section on transition plans, giving you some guidance of what should be there and how does it relate to your planning process. We also have examples of the inventory process with some checklists, some MnDOT data dictionary, data fields, so you can see what MnDOT is actually doing. They've been working on their detailed inventory for a couple of years now. They're not quite there yet. They're getting really close. So you can see all the information that they're reviewing as part of their transition plan, their inventory for curb ramps, and they have another sheet here that we've included for sidewalks. At the same time, they're reviewing their pedestrian overpass bridges, their traffic signal systems, anything that's a pedestrian facility, they're reviewing that. So there's quite a bit of information to collect here, a number of ways to do it. We're not trying to guide you one way to do your collection or another. Each agency has a different way of storing that information via different GIS websites or just an Excel spreadsheet system or payment management program. They may include this information to that. So we're just providing you with some of the information that has been collected by other people. Scott County here in Minnesota has also created their own spreadsheet template that we've included. They were kind enough to share that with us, which has a little bit of automatic feature where if you input some criteria that does not meet ADA, it'll flag it off to the side so you know that you have an issue there. For construction purposes, MnDOT has some ADA checklists that their construction observation people use. Those have been included down here, both for curb ramps and APS, so that you can continue, as you build new curb ramps, you can check them and make sure they're compliant going on to the future. And we also have some example self-evaluations. We've got some samples for kind of a high-level self-evaluation where you're not necessarily looking at each curb ramp. Might be a starting point for some agencies that feel a little overwhelmed with the amount of information they collect. And then we have some very detailed self-evaluations. So I'm not going to go into these too much. I'm going to click open one of the detailed ones. This one's from California. Section of their manual, and they've got information on all their curb ramps included into this table, so you can see, they can tell which ones are compliant, which ones are not compliant. One thing that I just saw yesterday is the City of Minneapolis has completed their inventory. They've been working through their inventory. To help them in that process, they actually created an iPad application to do their data collection, so they can review all that electronically using that system. So that was that first section, the process. Now we're going to actually get into the model transition plan template. We've included two things here: the actual template, which is a Word document template, a DOT, and we also have a transition plan commentary, which is basically a Word or a PDF of much of the things that I'm saying here today. So we're not going to open up the commentary, but we will talk about the transition plan template. It's got a number of areas in it, so 9 total. The first one being the introduction. Second one, self-evaluation, just listing the things you found in that portion of your compliance policy. Your policies and practices that each agency will be using moving forward. Your priorities, how you're going to accomplish making your community accessible, what areas you're going to focus on first. Your Title II ADA coordinator. Again, something your agency should already have. How is this document going to relate to that? And we have a question.
Yeah, going back to your 50-person requirement, does that include police and fire staff?
If that police and fire staff are included within that city or agency, if their employer is that agency, I believe it would be included. I'm not a legal interpretation of that. That's the way I've interpreted it. That's something that you'd want to review with your legal counsel to see how they interpret that. If it's 50 full-time employees, so if you have some part-time employees, do 2 part-time employees and add up to 1 full-time employee, that's an interpretation I would defer to your legal counsel. All right, so the 6th section of our model transition plan is your implementation schedule. And that's just a summary of how you're going to implement these changes to your facilities. The 7th section, public outreach, just summarizing how you performed your outreach to the disabled community. Number 8 there, grievance procedure. Again, something that you already should have. How does this document relate to your in-place procedure, or how are you changing your procedure to bring it up to speed? And then the last one, monitoring the progress. How are you going to update this document in the future? What schedule are you setting? How are you going to document the changes that you're making? We also have, right here's the link to that template. We're going to go forward once and talk about the appendices real quick. The way we've got this set up is the body of the transition plan. We want to write once, or we're suggesting that you write once and not update that very often. Putting all the information that is going to get updated regularly into appendices, so those you can swap out on an as-needed basis without changing the master document, without having going through the council approval process again. So here are the appendices that we're suggesting. Add to them, delete them as you feel needed or as you feel comfortable doing so. First one being the self-evaluation results. Here's where you would insert your detailed information. If you're going to go through and evaluate every curb ramp, every length of sidewalk, every bus stop, that's where you put that detailed information. Appendices B, the schedule and budget. Talk about how you're going to accommodate this. And we have another question.
Yeah, where do you stop improving ramps when the rest of the sidewalk may not be compliant, or if there are driveways?
That goes back to how you define the scope of your project. If it's a mill and overlay project where you're just doing some curb repair and milling and overlay, like I said before, it's been interpreted that curb ramps are part of that, but sidewalk might not be. So what you would need to do to improve the curb ramp back to a logical tie-down point is all that you're required to do. If, as part of that curb ramp or mill and overlay project, you're also doing other sidewalk replacement, then it could be interpreted that any sidewalk in need of upgrade should be included in that project. And so same thing with driveways. If you're doing other driveway replacement, then you should be updating all those driveways as part of that project. It's any elements within the scope of that project should be updated to current ADA requirements. That does not mean that you need to buy right-of-way for those elements. If you don't have any other right-of-way acquisition, that would require a change in scope. And you don't have to change your scope of your project to provide those improvements. Appendix C, public outreach. Here's again where you would insert your detailed information about that public outreach, your summary of your comments, your agendas if you had public meetings where you had a formal agenda, put that into the appendices and not in the main body. Your detailed grievance procedure would go in appendices D. Your contact information in appendices E. People come and go with agencies. You're going to want to be able to update that information fairly easily. Appendices F, your agency ADA design standards and procedures. Listing them here. Again, we talked about how PROAG is not a final rule yet. It's still in the final rulemaking process. If you're adopting that here and they change it, this is where you would update that appendices without having to update your main body of your transition plan. And we have appendices G there, the glossary of terms. All right. So I'm going to go back here and flip open the model transition plan template. It's going to be a Word document. You can see at the top, it's calling it document 1. It's because this is a Word document template, so you can't overwrite the original template there without trying to do so. I'll make it a little easier for everybody to read here. We'll walk through the introduction. Introduction has some fairly stock language here. We've kind of highlighted things that we know we need to change as you customize it to each agency template. Talks about the need for your transition plan, the purpose of it, and what you're hoping to accomplish. So some stock language here should be pretty common language. I don't think anybody's going to have too much heartburn with this. Feel free to review it, change some things if you feel you need to do so. but it's fairly stock language there. This also outlines the requirements of Title II, what each agency is required to do. So you're making it well known, this is what we're holding ourselves to, this is what the government is holding ourselves to, and what we're trying to accomplish. If you look in the lower right-hand corner of the screen there, in the bold text, this document is just for public rights-of-way. It's not intended to cover any buildings, any grounds, parks. This document is not, this template's not set up for that. That doesn't mean you can't incorporate those elements into this template, just we haven't set it up to do so. Self-evaluation. Again, this is where you're going to talk about what you did with your self-evaluation, how you did it, and what you found out. We're just looking for a summary here in the body of the text, but you might want to mention all the facilities that you reviewed. Get some statistics here. How many miles of sidewalk, number of curb ramps, miles of trail, traffic control signals, bus stops, any other pedestrian facility element that you've covered. Policies and practices. This is really where you're setting forth how you're going to treat ADA in the future, how you're going to incorporate these standards into your day-to-day policies, day-to-day work. More than likely, you've been incorporating ADA into your new projects for quite some time. That's what you're going to say here, that you're incorporating ADA, you're following ADA, and here's also where you're going to talk about how you're going to respond for requests for ADA improvements and how you're going to maintain your ADA facilities. Put your policies in here, make sure it's public record, everybody knows what to expect about how you're maintaining and responding to questions. We also have a little paragraph in here about who do you contact if you want to request an ADA improvement. We don't want everybody that wants a curb ramp installed to file a grievance procedure. If there's ability for them to call someone up and have some action taken pretty quickly, that's a much calmer way of doing things rather than going through a formal procedure. Improvement schedule here. We've got set up so that through your public process and your staff and elected officials, you've identified some priority areas. Part of that frequently asked questions from FHWA, they put the guidelines out there that your government facilities, your commercial districts, and your employment centers should be priority areas that should be treated first. Here's where you input where your priority areas are for each agency and how you're going to rank those even. And so those are the ones that you're going to want to hit first if you have any ability for specific ADA improvement projects. We've also included the paragraph that additional priority will be made if given to any location where projects were done in the last 20 years, concurrent with that ADA regulation, where ADA facilities were not correctly added to the project, if they were omitted adjacent to some of those mill and overlay projects, additional priority should be given to those, because those are where each agency has additional risk, because that's where things were not done as should have been done according to the ADA regulations. External agency coordination. Not uncommon. You're going to have multiple agencies overlapping. I'm going to throw out an example of a state highway intersecting with a county road within the jurisdiction of one city. You have 3 agencies there that have some responsibility to make sure ADA is met at that intersection. All 3 need to coordinate together and make sure that happens. If you add in there that there's a transit provider that has a bus stop there, that's a 4th agency. All need to work together, maintain ADA, all responsible if there's an ADA complaint at that intersection. Schedule. In the body of this document, we're not talking specific schedules in our template, but more setting some goals. After 5 years, we're going to complete this priority area. After 10 years, 80% of all priority areas are going to be accessible or have improvements made. And after 20 years, 80% of all facilities will be accessible. Some general goals that we put in there. Change those as you wish. Those are just some suggested goals that we came up with. ADA coordinator, this just talks about you have one. Contact information is in the appendix. and you're following the appropriate protocols. Implementation schedule. Here's where we talk about how the agency is going to achieve compliance with ADA. Here's where you say, we're going to create these projects, or we're going to do these projects, or you can go as we've got set up as two methods of achieving pedestrian facilities, upgrading pedestrian facilities. One concurrent with your standard street and utility improvement projects. You're going to continue to treat those probably like you already have, where you upgrade ADA as you go along, and a second method being, or a secondary method being, standalone ADA projects as funding allows, based on staff input on a case-by-case basis. Those are the two base ones we have in there. You may come up with that you see a need for greater priority on some of those, but that's the stock language we have in there of how you're going to implement your ADA improvements. You might want to look at adjusting your street and utilities improvement schedules based on how you see your priority areas shake out. You may want to shift those schedules around so you hit a priority area a little sooner in your process than you were originally intending to. That's just one of the things that you can put in here into how you're implementing the schedule. Public outreach. We got some default language there and a note there to insert a summary of your items. Put your public open house dates, your meetings with disabled council or anything of that nature. Grievance procedure. This is the paragraph, the section in the document that says we have a grievance procedure in accordance with the ADA. We've included it in the appendix. And then monitoring the progress. Section of the document where you say we're going to continue to update this. We're targeting a certain date maybe. We're suggesting that if this is a new document to your agency, you update it in a short term, maybe 3 to 5 years down the line, to incorporate any of the immediate changes that you find you need to do coming out of this review process. Okay, we have a question from the audience.
Actually, I have about 5 questions.
Okay.
Rounded up here,
5
so
questions.
I just thought I'd give you a bunch at once. So the first one is, there's someone from the LTAP in Pennsylvania, and they wonder if it would be okay to show and reference these documents in Pennsylvania.
I think we're comfortable sharing this with anyone that we see fit. When we were looking for examples of transition plans for public right-of-way, we did a nationwide search, and we didn't find a lot. So there are some out there. We referenced those to develop this, but we consider this a pretty shareable document. Use it. Anyone can use it. You're going to have to. Each agency's going to have to look at their own requirements from their legal counsel standpoint, their comfortability using this, but we're open to sharing this to anyone who wants it.
Okay, and the next question comes from a county that only has 20 people in their road and bridge department. However, their overall county government has more than 50 employees. So would they need to have a plan?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, the next one. Are ped ramps required to be replaced with a 2013 mill overlay that was installed within the past 5 to 10 years and installed in accordance with MnDOT standard plates available at the time of previous construction?
It's kind of, that falls within that area that you have curb ramps. The legal precedence back in Pennsylvania in the mid-90s was you're required to install curb ramps with your mill and overlay projects, and then the current California state case law is saying that you need to upgrade curb ramps. You know, the California state lawmaking process does not necessarily govern here yet. I would say that ruling probably will be carried forth nationwide here in the next few years. It may be appropriate to do so, depending on what kind of elements you have as part of the scope of that project. But it's important to note that those curb ramps, if they're not up to current standards, even though they were installed under the current standards at the time, if they don't meet current standards, need to be flagged in your transition plan for upgrade in the future anyway. And so if you're out there working, it may be an appropriate time to do so.
Okay, next question. In a mill and overlaying project, if right-of-way is required at the intersection to make the intersection ramps ADA compliant, then the sidewalk ramps at the intersections do not need to be modified to become ADA compliant, correct?
It's a tough issue there. If you don't have ramps, I believe you're probably still required to put a ramp in. You have to review that with your legal counsel on what kind of risk you want to take there. You can try to meet as many of the requirements of ADA as possible without buying right away. Upgrading ramps to make them compliant, needing to buy right to upgrade ramps is outside the scope. That doesn't mean you shouldn't update the ramps to the best of your ability within the scope of your project. You should do whatever you can within the scope of your project to make your project compliant.
Next question is, on a long mill and overlay project with sidewalks on both sides of the street, do all 4 quadrants of the intersections have to be modified, or can an agency choose one ADA compliant route on one side of the street or the other and focus on the ADA compliant route only?
That's something it's very interesting. Within the guidance of the rulemaking, I believe you could install only one ADA compliance route. You probably will be required to sign it so that you can direct people to the ADA compliant route. But any access points that might be on the other side of the street, either a residence or a commercial facility, commercial building, an employment center, that ADA route would have to connect to those as well. So if it's a long stretch of road where there's no access points, just a sidewalk on a long block, you feasibly could have only one of those sidewalks ADA compliant, but you'd have to mark and route people to that one. But if there's any access points there within that block, you would more likely be deemed needed to provide an ADA compliant route to those access points.
Next question. The ultimate goal is to update all existing ADA paths, correct? Often funds are expended only within the context of other projects, and some existing facilities seem as if not even a portion of these needs will ever be met.
I would agree with that somewhat. The ultimate goal is to make all pedestrian facilities within your agency ADA compliant. And part of the reason why we're looking to prioritize areas for improvement is to better utilize the funds available. There's definitely the viewpoint that there are greater needs for ADA compliant facilities in certain areas, like we talked about, government centers, employment centers, commercial business districts, transit facilities, making sure bus stops are accessible. You can get to a bus stop and through an accessible route. There are areas that have less of a priority, and that's where we want to make sure that we're applying the funds appropriately.
Okay. What are the ADA requirements for a non-urban section?
It doesn't matter if it's urban or not. ADA still needs to be met. If you have pedestrian facilities there, they need to follow ADA. Anywhere where a pedestrian facility crosses a vehicle traveled lane, you need to provide the truncated domes, the detectable warning surface, so that a visually impaired pedestrian knows that they're approaching or crossing into a vehicle way.
When a municipality does sidewalk inspection and determines a property owner should make repairs, is there a point where the work is considered just repairs, or when is it considered an alteration?
Anytime you tear into a concrete sidewalk, it's pretty much considered an alteration. It can be just maintenance if you're just doing crack filling. You can probably bevel poor joints as long as that stays within ADA and still have that considered maintenance. But other than crack filling and pothole filling, things of that nature, most things where you have to do an actual removal is considered an alteration. That's kind of how I've always looked at it. If you have to remove anything, it's an alteration.
Okay, you may have just answered this question, but I'll ask it. If the property is on a corner and repairs are being done at an adjoining sidewalk, when is an upgrade required for a non-compliant ramp?
That kind of falls within the scope of the project again. If your project limits go through the intersection or go beyond, go to that curb ramp, then that curb ramp will need to be upgraded as well. It's all based on the limits of your project. You're not required necessarily to expand your limits to incorporate anything, but each agency might have to review that, and if it's appropriate to, they may choose to do so.
And this is the last question I have right now, and if I don't ask this correctly, please email again. From what I'm understanding is that this is a county, and they're wondering, as a municipality, are we both to be in the document, meaning the county and the city?
I think that goes back to how you're going to coordinate with external agencies. As a city within a county, you may want to put a specific paragraph in there saying how you're going to coordinate with your specific county, how you're going to coordinate with your specific DOT. You may even put you come to an agreement with those counties or DOTs. You may, if you have a joint powers agreement or some other agreement that you've developed for doing projects like this with them, you may want to put some information in there about that. But it's a city document, or it could be a county document. It's not necessarily a joint city or county document. Okay, and one more question.
I have more questions come in. With the amount of sidewalks, roads, ped ramps, it's going to take quite a lot of work to conduct a full evaluation. Is there anything that prevents us from scheduling out the evaluation process over a number of years? If so, should we follow the prioritization for implementation as an evaluation schedule?
Yes. Following the prioritization you come up with for your self-evaluation is preferred, I believe, if you have the need to space it out. If we go back to some of the example self-evaluations that we included, wherever it is, we actually the high-level example process includes much of that same language, where where it talks about you feel overwhelmed with the number of facilities you have. You're going to review your high priority facilities in detail, and you're going to make assumptions on where your secondary and third priority facilities are. And then as your programs progress, you perform those detailed inventories and self-evaluations on those secondary and third priority areas. Okay, another question.
What if there are currently no pedestrian facilities? Are there still requirements? Would a rural shoulder be considered a pedestrian facility? Would the public process ever require an agency to address ADA with a new installation on a rural segment?
ADA only covers pedestrian facilities that are present. It does not require you to add pedestrian facilities. It only requires you to make pedestrian facilities that your agency has compliant and accessible for all users. So if you don't have any pedestrian facilities, this doesn't require you to add them. Through your other planning process and more of a complete streets look, you may come to a policy or a point where you want to add those pedestrian facilities. When you add them, you just need to make sure that they are compliant. All right, no further questions at the time. We were at the appendices of the document template. And so we're just going to flip through what we've included here. Appendix A, self-evaluation results. Here's where you would include whatever criteria you used. You would put the detailed information there. We've included just some brief results of what you would find. If you find so many % of your sidewalks to be complete and meeting ADA, put that in there. I'm not opposed to showing some low percentages there. I think that's what you might expect for your curb ramps, knowing that the guidelines and criteria have changed over the years. This first self-evaluation is going to set your baseline. One of the things that we're looking to do, or what people will be looking at, is how you're progressing. And so setting a baseline, even if it's low, might not look good for the agency initially, but it allows you to show that progress you make. If you only have 15% of curb ramps compliant when you do your initial evaluation, and 3 years later you have 30% compliant, that's 100% improvement. That's a very positive way to look at it. Appendix B, schedule, budget information. We've thrown some very generic numbers in here for making some improvements based on curb ramp, intersection corner. These numbers are based on spring 2012. As agencies go through with their curb ramp improvement projects or ADA improvement projects, you'll probably have better pricing than what we've included here. But this will help guide you and show to your policymakers that if you want to include improvements for an entire area, priority area 1, this is roughly what it's going to cost to do so. And that'll help your budgeting point or standpoint. Here's also where you can include your detailed capital improvement project information, kind of outlining which ones will include ADA improvements. Appendices is where you put your detailed public outreach section, your agendas, any of your comments. You can include that here in your Appendix C. Appendix D, grievance procedure. Here we've included 2 examples, but the first part here is very important, the public notice. That is one of the requirements of ADA, that you provide public notice of what you're required to do. It's somewhat covered early on in the document where you list that, but here is the specific public notice provided by the Department of Justice. So here's the page to the right there, one of the sample grievance procedures that we've included. And we also have another one from Hennepin County here in Minnesota that they're utilizing. Contact information, Appendix E, listing out your detailed contact information for your Title II coordinator. If you have a public right-of-way coordinator, put those in here too. If you have another person you want to contact for any just requests for ADA improvements, you can put that information here as well. Appendix F, this is where we're going to include your agency design standards and procedures. We've written up a few just basic procedures that we'd use, saying, we're going to upgrade our intersections to this level. We're going to upgrade our sidewalks and trails to this level. Same thing with traffic control signals. If you have a specific policy regarding the installation of APS, accessible pedestrian signals, at your traffic control signals, this is where you would put that in here. And bus stops. Bus stops can a little more complicated because you have that interagency relationship there with a transit provider within a municipality or county. In some instances, that municipality might be the transit provider, but often that's not the case. We have a question.
Yeah, Jim, we have a couple questions that came in, and I want to remind everyone we have about 7 minutes left of the webinar, so if you do have any final questions, please send them in now. As a county agency, we have sidewalks in cities that are within our right-of-way. However, we consider these sidewalks to be city sidewalks as they are fully paid for and maintained by the city. How should we address this within our ADA plan?
If they're in your right-of-way, you are responsible. If it's in the city limits, they're also responsible. If your policy as a county is that the city maintains and owns those sidewalks, it's probably just the responsibility of the county to work with that city to get those sidewalks upgraded. It's the same thing that a DOT is going to have, kind of same relationship a DOT is going to have with cities and counties. As I mentioned, the Minnesota Department of Transportation is completing their sidewalk inventory here this fall, finalizing it this fall. Rest assured, if they find some very non-compliant areas, they're going to be talking to those counties and cities about working together to find a way to get those sidewalks upgraded to meet ADA. And as a city, your maintenance sidewalk policy might be that the property owner is responsible for that. It's the city's responsibility of working with those property owners to make sure that the public rights-of-way are accessible.
Can we remove non-compliant PED facilities to gain compliance?
No. There is a specific section of the ADA saying removal of pedestrian facilities is not a viable way of achieving compliance. So if you have them there now, they need to be compliant and they probably need to be maintained going forth. If you have a major reconstruction project where there's no longer a need for a pedestrian facility, that might be a separate issue, but removal of a pedestrian facility just to achieve compliance is not appropriate.
Does PROAG require winter maintenance of all sidewalks and or trails?
PROAG requires maintenance, including snow removal. Trails can get a little bit of an issue. I know there are plenty of recreation trails that are not maintained over the winter. Public right-of-ways and public facilities for pedestrians are required to be maintained, which includes snow removal. Again, the city and the underlying agency is responsible for making sure that happens, even though it might not be the city or our underlying agency performing the work. But maintenance and removal snow removal, winter maintenance is part of PROAG, part of making your facilities accessible year-round.
Do the new ADA rules guidelines apply to areas outside of the right-of-way?
ADA applies to all public facilities. PROAG specifically talks and is written for the public rights-of-way. They are working on including separate guidance for shared use paths and bike trails, including that. They're in a rulemaking on that right now. There are separate guidelines being proposed for outdoor developed areas, which have different criteria to be met. That's also in a rulemaking process. And the PROAG, would not apply to any site work. Really only applies to public rights-of-way. There are slightly different requirements because of that nature alongside roadways. And so PROAG is specifically for public rights-of-way.
And the last question I have right now is, who polices this process, and what are the penalties for non-compliance?
There really is, it's kind of a self-policed process. FHWA would, and the U.S. DOT would govern for public rights-of-way, anything that's relating to the transportation facilities, which most of our public rights-of-way are set up for that. The Department of Justice also is the agency responsible for making sure things happen, but there really is no policing agency. It's all based on a grievance procedure complaint basis. The Department of Justice is auditing cities. They have a group, Project Civic Access, that goes through and audits cities in total. So all aspects of the city, making sure that they're compliant, and they'll provide some timetables for making sure that anything they find gets completed. It's really more of a complaint grievance procedure process. It's kind of a publicly policed or self-policed process. Okay. Just a few more things included in our template. We have a glossary of terms at the end. It's not necessarily all-encompassing. If each agency uses specific terms, feel free to add them. If you're not using some of these terms, feel free to take them out. And so that's the end of our template. As I mentioned before, we have a commentary in there, and the commentary basically just has everything that I've said today, or many of the things I said today, about why we put some things in there, how things interact. But it's there in a PDF talking about each section of the ADA template, our transition plan template. Includes some examples of how people, particularly Hennepin County, has documented their ADA improvements in the past, taking credit for the things that they have done. And the last tab we have here, so if you have any questions, we're on the last tab, is just some of the resources that we've added to the template that are useful in determining your ADA policies and procedures. We have one more question.
We had a couple people actually ask if you could just show how to access the documents online again quickly.
Sure.
Just show them the website.
The website is, let me get to it here. I'll show you how to get to it based on lrb.org, www.lrrb.org. It's in the resources portion of it. It's loading here. I'll go back to the home page and show you how to get to that. So once you're on the home page, you're going to go to resources. Correct, Renee? So, and then web software applications, and it's the first one. Right now, it's the first one. It's the most recent one on there. You click on it, and it gives you a download for the zip file. Once you have the zip file, just open it up. It creates this PDF. in the Documents folder. This PDF is the same PDF that we have on here. So, and the Documents has all the links that we've been using in this PDF. So that's what we're going to download is the actual PDF that we've been using today, and then the documents, supplemental documents that we've been clicking to and downloading from the PDF. So probably the most important resource I have here, ada.gov. They're the real experts, Department of Justice. They're the ones that if there are any complaints raised to a level where they have to get involved, they're the ones that are going to be making the rulemaking or the ruling from the process federal government standpoint. Also, the complaints could go to court, which is even less desirable for an agency. If there's no more questions, I'm going to thank you, and I hope you are able to download this document and make good use of it.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Just wanted to add that when you're on the LRB website, you can also use the search function in the top left corner and just type in ADA Transition Plan, and you can find the document that way as well. If you have any other questions, I think Jim has his email address up on the screen. You can follow up with questions with Jim after the webinar. And thank you for your time today.